All right, today we're going to be talking about the DBR, which is the direct behavior rating. We'll be using this to collect some baseline and post-intervention data to follow up on student behavior that's happening in your classrooms. The DBR is a tool that involves a brief rating of target behavior following a specified observation period. For example, a class activity like a science lab. For us, this is actually going to be during BLS. So you'll be looking at your entire class of BLS and then rating it immediately. DBR can be used as a means to repeatedly assess key behaviors. It's just one component of an intervention plan, and it's really just a way for us to collect data across the school about just behavior inside the classroom. You're going to be rating your students on three behaviors. So whether or not they're academically engaged, respectful, or disruptive. For academically engaged, this means any behavior that would be considered participation in your class. It could be active or passive. This might be writing, raising their hand, answering a question, talking about a lesson with the teammate, listening to the teacher, etc. In BLS, it could even be like drawing the letter in the air with your fingers. It could be listening to spelling, anything like that. If they're participating, then they would be academically engaged. If they're respectful, then of course they'll be compliant and you'll see polite behavior in response to both adults and peers. This is just general pro-social interactions with adults and kids alike. Lastly, disruptive behavior is defined as a student action that interrupts regular school or classroom activity or prevents you from getting through your lesson. So if a student is out of their seat, fidgeting, playing with objects, acting aggressively, talking or yelling about things that are unrelated to the lesson, that would be considered disruptive. So, the rating should correspond to the extent to which the class was observed displaying the target behavior. This is not about one child. This is about the entire class as a whole. So, if you have if most of your class as a whole does really well, but you have a few kids that aren't participating, that doesn't mean that half the class is not engaged. Just pull it down accordingly. The percentage of time is one way to think about this when you're thinking about your ratings. So, for example, at the end of your block, if you're thinking about the students were engaged half the time, then the class would receive a 5. This table also contains some tips for you on how to determine the best rating to possibly give. So you can think of either low, medium, or high, or never, sometimes, or always in each one of the behaviors: academically engaged, respectful, or disruptive. And then from there, if you're like, well, they were sometimes respectful, a little more than half, you could put them up to a 6 or a 7. And if you say, oh, respect was really low today, well, was it never or was it occasionally? And hopefully that way that can give you a little more guidance around which numbers to pick so that we get more reliable data across the school. When you are rating, each behavior should be considered independently of other targets. You may in your mind think, oh, that class was very disruptive, so I would give them, I would consider them disruptive, so they would also therefore be not respectful. That's not actually the case. So think about, just make sure you're looking at each one of those independently, and note that the sums they don't add up to 100, and they certainly don't have to. Also pay attention to the directionality of the scale. For the items of it academically engaged and respectful, a higher score would be a better score. That's why it points to the smiley face at the end. For disruptive, if the class has a higher score, that's actually worse. So a better class would have a lower score on the disruptive scale. Your form looks a little bit different from this one on the screen, but it's basically the same information. We need to know your name. It's going to be BLS. You can fill that in. The start and end time should be the same every day since your schedule doesn't change. But please write the date and also circle the day so that we know that we're getting 5 days of data from you. At least that's what we're hoping for. And then there are also, you'll see some behavior descriptions with some definitions under there if you ever need to check back and say, oh, was that actually disruptive behavior or was it respectful behavior? I'm not really sure. Have the form ready, and this is just like a trick of the trade, just have it ready so that you can complete it as soon as the class is over, ideally even within the transition. So if it's on the clipboard by the door, or whatever it is when you switch classes, so that you can get those ratings on the paper as soon as possible so that it's fresh in your mind. Please only complete the ratings if you're confident you observed the class for a sufficient amount of time, which you obviously did because you taught BLS, and you can complete the form soon after the end of the activity. For example, if you just forgot because things were crazy at the end of BLS, we would rather you check no observation today than to remember at 4 o'clock and then go back and try to put your ratings in. Actually, those ratings will probably be not very reliable at all, since a lot of times we color our memories based on our experiences with some other classes. So we want to get as much data from you as possible, but we want to make sure it's accurate data. So if you forget, it's okay. Just check no observation today. Other than that, this is really circling 3 numbers on a page for 5 days leading up to our PD that'll happen on Friday, October 31st. And then afterwards, we'll collect a few weeks of post-intervention data, and hopefully we'll be able to see a change in the behaviors in your classroom.